passing remarks, and I do want to share them because this is such an extraordinary moment for me. It's really overwhelming to me because we speak all the time about the science of climate change. We speak all the time about science coming first at the agency, and we do need to respect the differences in traditions and faith among all of our employees and all of our citizens. But when people ask me, and they do often in sort of these, let's get to know Mr. Jackson, where do you think your environmentalism comes from? I usually say, I know part of it comes from my religious upbringing, from my faith tradition. So this is very meaningful to me. I want to thank Rabbi Warren Stone. I want to thank Carlos Signessi for coming, Fred Kruger, of course, and Bishop. What an extraordinary set of remarks. Now, these are long, and I feel bad having these stand. I'll try to cut them out. I'm a preach, so... I also want to acknowledge Stephanie Owens over here, who has just been so instrumental in taking our dream, our vision of having not the award, but really connecting with the faith-based community, and instead of seeing these as separate issues, making them one. So Stephanie has really taken that, and this is one of many opportunities, I hope, where we come together. Again, not just for awards, but for the serious work ahead of us. And it's great to see Kathleen Rogers and Susan from Birthday Network doing tremendous work. And it's wonderful to come together with Catholics and Jews and Protestants and Muslims and evangelicals and Buddhists and Baha'is to talk about a common cause. It really is a common cause. To see people of different backgrounds, it's a pleasure to be with you. Now, I want to start by saying what it means to me to receive this honor as a steward of God's creation. Many of the environmentalists who hear that are likely glad to see me and my colleagues at the EPA who make everything I do possible. It's not about me at all, right? It's about those 17,000 men and women. But many people will be glad to see that we're being recognized by faith groups for our shared work to protect the planet, protect our oceans and our wilderness, protect our people who are part of our planet, as I'll speak about in a minute. And most people also probably think it's very nice to see our faith groups playing a real leading role in talking about issues of caring for our environment. Now, I'm also a realist, and I know that some of you may have seen personally folks who think that stewardship and environmental protection is something that faith groups and churches should leave to the rest of us. And I want to thank you. They think you should save souls, we should save the whales, I suppose, something like that. And thank you for not being part of that crowd. But there really is another reason that we're all here today, and it's probably, when I think about my moral calling for this field, very, very important. I grew up in the city. I'm a city girl. And so I wasn't able to see all of the beauty of the resources all the time that people who live in more rural areas do. Those who are blessed to live on our oceans, or I didn't see a mountain until, goodness knows, I grew up in New Orleans. We're the opposite sea level. But it's more than that. For me, what environmentalism is about is what faith and religion has been doing for centuries and centuries. And it's the reason for me that stewardship of God's creation, to me, translates into care for each other, stewardship of each other. When we talk about protection of our air and our water and our land, we're really talking about protection of our people as well. That's because we're protecting the air that we breathe, and the water that we drink, and the land where we build our homes, and our schools, and our businesses, and our houses of worship. For me, that's part of the work and history of environmentalism that speaks most to me. Think about our water 40 years ago. Our communities had very few mechanisms in place to protect water. If they protected water, it was because of sanitary engineering that was designed to protect us from the most basic of health threats, outbreaks of disease from our waste, from sewage. When the pollution in the Cuyahoga River caught fire, it was a national story because it was about industrial pollution. And it was an extraordinary outlier actually wasn't. There was a number of hazards of polluted water flowing through communities. They weren't all on fire, but it sort of woke us up to realize what we were doing to our water bodies. We were using them as big disposal pits. Today, 92% of Americans have access to water that meets federal drinking water standards. And the Cuyahoga River in Ohio is one of many water bodies that are much cleaner than they have been in literally generations. And when you get a glass of water from the faucet, EPA's job is to work along with the states to make sure it's clean and healthy. That means somewhere between 8 and 10% of Americans don't have access to clean and healthy water. Many of those are along our borders, on Indian tribal land, tribal nation land. Some of them are in parts of rural America that are small communities that can't afford what it would take to meet standards. And those are the toughest places to deal with because you don't want to ask people to move. But we have to find a way to make sure all Americans have access to clean and healthy water. I've traveled to places around the world where there is much greater numbers of people who don't have access to clean and healthy water. And it is an environmental issue that literally claims lives each and every day. So when we say stewardship of God's creation, we're talking about stewardship of each other's health and of lives here and far away. It's the same storyline when it comes to pollution in the air we breathe. It used to be that certain smog was visible in many cities, including this one. Something as simple as starting your car met harmful lead emissions pouring into our air. Today, pollution is down by more than half in our air in this country. Let alone it's been cut by more than 90% a year. Each year, the Clean Air Act has removed millions of tons of pollution from our skies. That progress on cleaner air has saved lives. Let me give you some numbers. They're eye-popping. 200,000 premature deaths avoided each year to clean air. Helped to avoid more than 650,000 cases of chronic bronchitis, 20,000 cases of heart disease, stopped 840,000 asthma attacks, spared 18 million children from respiratory illnesses. So stewardship of the environment is clearly a moral issue and caring for each other, and we have so much work to do. Now, the connection between environmentalism and religion is something that's also been around. I'm sort of fascinated that out of conflict, and we're in a time right now where we're having confrontation over really important issues. So I'm so glad to see you engaged, because I believe that out of that, we get to a better place. And it's not that we haven't had conflict before between religion and environment. When in the 60s, when environmentalism was really taking hold, when the Cuyahoga was on fire, when Rachel Carson's Silent Spring was on bestseller list, when the Santa Barbara oil spill happened and the environmental movement began to gain support, there were challenges about growing the issue. And there were issues within the church about what role the church may or may not have played in leading to man's arrogant belief that we can control this earth, that we will control this earth to our ends, rather than what I believe is the opposite, which is that we must learn to live in a way that sustains ourselves by sustaining the earth. There was an essay, The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis, 1966, widely read. It said it was religion's fault that we had an ecological crisis because they, especially Christianity, had set the stage for this idea that environmental destruction was a byproduct of our needs to control something I don't think many people believe now we can, especially when you look at the raging floods and droughts that are happening around the world. But when that conflict happened, something amazing also happened. When the essay was negative, but the response to it became quite positive. Many of the already developing ecological and environmental movements in the faith community began to pick up speed. It was the fuel that moved this movement forward. Against the charges that religion was to blame for the earth's destruction, religious environmentalists argue that dominion over all the earth implied not ownership of God's creation, but a fundamental responsibility for stewardship. And of course, there was a connection that they saw between protecting our air and water and land and each other. I bring up that moment not because we need to resurrect history that might not be pleasant, but because out of conflict, out of that moment, having to question the very basis for our connection to this earth came where we are today. And I'm very grateful for it. And at my core, I believe that out of these conflicts, out of some of the most horrible rhetoric I have seen that literally tips the price of a child with asthma or the loss of a loved one prematurely to the erroneous allegation that somehow millions of Americans will lose their jobs. Out of that kind of rhetoric, I believe with your help, will come a reinvigorated commitment to what is fundamentally our obligation to steward our planet and protect it. We take inspiration from Scripture, but I like the way environmentalists write and oftentimes sound as though they are writing with deep reverence and celebration, almost like Scripture. When Rachel Carson said that wonder and humility are wholesome emotions, and they do not exist side by side with a lust for destruction. You could hear that in any sanctuary. The gospel says Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like the lilies of the field. I like William McDonald. I saw him not too long ago. He's a big sustainability guru, cradle to cradle, if you've ever seen his work. He's designed for Fortune 500 companies. But if you ask him about his ideal green design, he talks about a tree.
Yeah.
He said, in one presentation, he said, imagine this design assignment for an engineer. Design something that makes oxygen, sequesters carbon, fixes nitrogen, distills water, accrues solar energy as food, makes complex sugars in food, creates microclimates, changes colors with the seasons, and self-replicates. He also said, it is a little arrogant to think we can do that considering it took human beings 5,000 years to figure out how to put wheels on our luggage. And another huge overlap in environmentalism and stewardship is our pursuit of environmental justice. The effort to help communities that are overburdened by environmental and economic challenges is surely consistent with calls to help the least of these. Or the concept of tzedakah in Judaism, and the calls to care for the poor in the Quran. Environmental challenges have the power to deny equality of opportunity, to hold back progress. It's become clearer and clearer over the years that environmental threats do more than limit, but absolutely impede progress in struggling communities to make it harder to break free from cycles of poverty. Religious groups have done extraordinary work over the years to relieve the burdens of poverty and fight against inequality in our society, and I'm happy to see that emphasis of expanding into the issue of environmental justice. By the way, I use one more thing when I talk about environmental justice, which is really important. Air does not stay in one community. So if the air in a poor community is dirty because that's where we do put all of our smokestacks and all of our big dirty pollution sources, it's coming your way. And we will not have clean air in this country until we deal with the unfinished business, as you said, Bishop, of those areas that seem to have been put for last. And water is the same way. Water flows downhill. Anybody can tell you that. And so if you destroy and foul the upstream communities that eventually form our navigable waters and waterways, you're fouling them. You cannot protect the rivers if you don't protect the streams. And that's fundamentally why environmental justice, although it may sound like it's limited to a small area, is really all of our concern. One last area of overlap is obvious and urgent. For the first time in history, we've reached a point where our everyday activities, our lives, our travel, our commerce, our agriculture are affecting the fate of the planet in big ways, mega ways. Environmentalists are deeply concerned about the rapidly changing climate, what consequences that will have for humans and the natural world. For people of faith, it's something that emphasizes once again, as we heard by our speakers, the unity of all humankind. The change in the careful balances of creation will have impact on every continent, affecting communities from Indonesia to Indiana. It brings us together in what many faiths call God's family. It ties us all into a community that we must make into a beloved community if we hope to save it. We move to work on climate change and protecting our planet beyond the environmental or economic imperatives and shows us that it is a moral obligation. The question now is, what can we do? Because we must strengthen our collaboration on critical environmental issues, cleaning up our air, land, and water, fighting for environmental justice to relieve the burdens of pollution in poor and minority communities, protecting the planet we all call home, and stewarding God's creation. We need your leadership. In the history of this nation, faith communities have been instrumental in efforts to open new opportunities and improve the world we live in. I've already seen great examples from many of you. Earlier this week, I was at Florida Avenue Baptist Church right here in Washington, D.C., as they unveiled very proudly an array of solar panels to power their building, the first African-American church in D.C. And I know once that happens, the other pastors are right behind them. We want to connect talent and enthusiasm we see in faith groups like that across the nation to what we're doing and to what each of you are doing. In order to do that more effectively, thanks to Ms. Stephanie Owens, we started a faith-based and neighborhood partnerships initiative. EPA's role in the faith-based and neighborhood partnerships initiative is one piece of a larger effort that's happening in the White House. They have an Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, and it's meant to join 12 other federal agencies, plus EPA, Veterans Affairs, USDA, Health and Human Services, to form partnerships with faith and community-based groups and leaders. EPA's role in the partnership is to diversify the voices, expand the conversation on the environment that's calling for changes on the environmental front, and broadening the tent of the coalition, and it is the vast majority of Americans. It is the vast majority of Americans who are calling for protecting our water, protecting our air, ensuring that the price of prosperity or new jobs is not someone's child. Literally, someone's child's health oftentimes impacted before that child even breathes her or his first breath. So I need your enthusiasm and support and spirit, and that's what we have to do. And out of this conflict, as before, I know will bring us to a new platform of humanity and spirituality. So thank you for your leadership.